Okay, books by Marxists of color. One of the most educational books I ever read on the history of communism in the United States was Black Radical by Nelson Peary. Nelson Peary is an amazing writer. African-American man, was in the Communist Party USA. He fought in World War II. After World War II, he came home and he joined the Communist Party. He was kicked out of the Communist Party because he refused to abandon the Black Belt thesis, and so he eventually ended up starting a Maoist group called the Communist Labor Party. Nelson Peary is one of my favorite writers. Nelson Peary wrote a very good book called The Future is Up to Us, which is about the computer revolution and the implications of the computer revolution for socialism. Amazing guy. So if you're looking for an amazing African-American writer from a communist perspective, Nelson Peary is very good. Now, there's another writer, a little bit older than Nelson Peary, but from a similar background. It's a guy named Harry Haywood. And Harry Haywood was a leader of something called the African Blood Brotherhood. And this was an armed self-defense group during the 1920s of African Americans who fought against the Klan. And the African Blood Brotherhood eventually merged into the Communist Party. And so Harry Haywood published an autobiography. It's called Black Bolshevik. And it is his memoir of being a leader of the Communist Party in the 1930s, eventually getting kicked out of the Communist Party, and becoming a Maoist in the 1970s. It's very good. It's a very, very good memoir. Also, there's a very good book by, Ben Davis. Benjamin Davis was a Communist Party member who was on the New York City Council in the 1940s. He was on the New York City Council, Benjamin Davis, and after he was on the New York City Council, he went to federal prison for being a communist. They put him in prison for being a member of the Communist Party. And he wrote a very, very good autobiography called Communist Councilman from Harlem. So I would check that out as well. There are a number of great African-American communist writers. There are many, many. I mean, William L. Patterson, who was the man who wrote We Charge Genocide, which was a document presented at the United Nations accusing the United States of committing genocide against the African-American community. The Soviet Union gave a platform to this American communist writer to charge the United States with genocide. We Charge Genocide. And I knew old communists who would sell We Charge Genocide, this pamphlet. It was like a pamphlet written by William L. Patterson, a leader of the Communist Party, presented at the UN, would sell it on street corners. And all over the United States, Communist Party members walked up and down the streets of black neighborhoods selling this pamphlet, We Charge Genocide. And they would sell it for a nickel or a dime. And it was all over the United States. This document presented at the United Nations, written by an African-American communist, accusing the U.S. government of genocide. Amazing stuff. I love the speeches of Kwame Ture, right? Kwame Ture is very ideological, very ideological. He was Stokely Carmichael, later joined the Black Panthers, became Kwame Ture, started the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. Kwame Ture, the scientific socialist, I really have a lot of admiration for him. Very much a critic of imperialism, an anti-Zionist, a critic of Israel. I have a lot of admiration. I've learned a lot from Kwame Ture. Huey Newton's writings are very, very good, especially his theoretical writings. So there are many African-American communist leaders who've done amazing writing that I've learned from over the years. So thank you for asking. Very good stuff. I mean, there's actually a very interesting historian who writes on the history of American communism, Robin D.G. Kelly. And he wrote a book called Hammer and Hoe, and it was about the Communist Party of Alabama in the 1930s and how the Communist Party recruited very heavily among African Americans in the 1930s. And this book, Hammer and Hoe, is very, very good. And it's a very detailed academic history of the Communist Party's role in the black community in the 1930s in Alabama. Very good stuff. There's a very important leader of the Communist Party in the 1930s. He has one very good pamphlet that's available, You Cannot Kill the Working Class. He was actually sentenced to death for preaching communism to the black community. Angelo Herndon was his name, Angelo Herndon. He wrote a very beautiful pamphlet called You Cannot Kill the Working Class, which was about how he became a communist, why he was put on death row. And the Supreme Court eventually freed him. But he was on death row because in Alabama they had a law that you could not incite black people to revolution, and that was punishable by the death penalty. So he was handing out leaflets for the Communist Party, and they tried to give him the death penalty. And it talks about how the Communist Party organized to bring white workers and black workers together. Black and white unite and fight. It's really powerful stuff. So Angelo Herndon is very amazing too.